Today on JiK Labs, we're going to find averages of our data that meet certain criteria utilizing AVERAGEIF and AVERAGEIFS. Let's get started. Now that we've got Excel open, we're back on our summary sheet. For the last few weeks, we've been looking at SUMIFS, COUNTIFS, and today we're going to look at averages. In previous episodes, we've looked at the total sales based by salespeople and the given date ranges. Also, we've looked at the count of those sales and those date ranges as well. Today, we're going to look at the average sales of the salesperson and the average sales of that salesperson given the date range. And we're going to do that by using AVERAGEIF and AVERAGEIFS. Just like SUMIF and COUNTIFS, we're going to start the equation with equals average if. We're going to open those parentheses. Now, AVERAGEIF and AVERAGEIFS are like SUMIF and SUMIFS, where their layout is a little bit different. So keep that in mind. So we're going to come in here and we're going to go average if. We're going to open the parentheses. The range that we want to look at is the salesperson. And once again, we are utilizing cell name references. When we'll link that video up here for you, it just saves you a lot of time and energy once you get into making equations trying to analyze your data. The criteria, well, we want that to equal Alice. Right now we're going to lock in the column. And what's the average range that we want to look at? Well, we were looking at sales totals. And we're going to close that up. And we're going to format it to dollars since that's what it is. So once again, as we've done in previous weeks, we're going to come in here and we're going to look at JAK, average. And we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to utilize this actual cell references. So we're going to go back to our data tab. The range is going to be the salesperson. And then we're going to come back in our cell references. Wrong sheet. We want that to equal JAK. And in that cell range, we're going to go back to data, and we're going to say sales amount. And we can close the parentheses and hit OK. Format to dollar signs, and we're going to see that total. But we're actually going to come in here, and we're going to change B14 to B13 to make it match the equation up above. So let's come in here and copy these guys over. We're going to come in here with the apostrophe, enter. We're going to come in here with the apostrophe. And we're going to see that since I didn't lock that cell reference into, we were getting an equation error. So that would, to make these two equations match, we're going to come in here and we're going to look at it this way. So right here we have AVERAGEIF salesperson, the criteria that it wants to equal, and the average that we're looking at, which is the sales. Down below is the same exact equation, but we're using actual cell references. We're referencing the data tab, C2 to C82, and we wanted to equal Alice. And then what we're averaging is the data tab, which is our sales column. Both will work for you, but using the cell name references just saves you a lot of time when you're entering these equations yet again. I know I say that all the time, but trust me, if you're doing a lot of Excelling and you got to analyze a lot of data, taking the 5-10 minutes or whatever to name your cells to give them cell references will save you a lot of time in the long run once you're utilizing this data. So let's go back a little bit, get rid of these guys. So what we're going to do now is we're going to copy AVERAGEIFs down. We're going to look at all those sales. The average sales is about $1,600 to $1,500 per salesperson. So if we were to come up here and say average, and let's just do average of all the sales. And we get 1,600, which is what we're seeing down here as well. But now, just like in weeks past, we want to look at the average sales by salesperson given a certain date range. So once again, AVERAGEIF is great. only if you have one criteria. If you have more than one, you have to use AVERAGEIFS. And like with some ifs, AVERAGEIFS's format is a little bit different than AVERAGEIF. So let's take a look at that right now. AVERAGEIFS. The first thing we need to do is enter the criteria range, which is our sales for this point in time. The criteria range is going to be the salesperson. And what do we want that to equal? Well, we want that to equal Alice, in this case, B13, and then we'll copy it down and get everybody else. Next is our criteria range, and we're going to look at the invoice date. And what do we want that to equal? Well, we want that to be greater than or equal to. So you have to use the quotations and the and sign. Otherwise, if you just select C8, it's going to say date equals C8. So you have to use the quotation marks around greater than or equal to and the and sign to get it to be greater than or equal to and the cell reference. So we're going to come up here and we'll lock that cell reference in place with F4. But once again, in previous days, if we stop right now, that's not going to give us what we want. Since we want a date range, we have to give it a start date and an end date. So we're going to come in here and say date again. And what's that going to equal? It's going to be less than or equal to the end date. And we're going to lock that into place, cell reference into place as well. We're going to hit OK. And as you can see, as we copy these down, these all should equal. Well, because right now the date range, as we know from previous videos, stops in June. So let's update that date to March 1st, 2021. And you're going to see AVERAGEIFS has updated. AVERAGEIF has stayed the same. AVERAGEIF is looking at all of Alice's sales and averaging them up. There is no date range or anything. And there's only one criteria: is the average of the sales has to equal Alice as the salesperson. But on AVERAGEIFS, that updated because not only are we looking at all of Alice's sales, but we're looking at the date ranges as well. So that will change. Also, you'll notice that SUMIFS and COUNTIFS also updated. If we go back to 12/31/2021, and we'll see that we're back to our 80 sales, our total that we have seen for a while now, and then the averages now equal for AVERAGEIF and AVERAGEIFS. Once again, I would recommend just utilizing AVERAGEIFS. Why? Well, because the format is a little bit different. So if you start with AVERAGEIF, but then you decide that you have more criteria as you progress, you have to change the whole equation. If you use AVERAGEIFS, that will still work with your, what are you going to average? It's the sales. The criteria or the criteria range is the salesperson, and what is that going to equal Alice? If we were to do that same equation, let's just do it right here. If we were to come in here and edit this equation to get rid of all the dates, so right now we're just doing an average of the salesperson, sales, that equals B13. And let's hit enter. And you'll see that this now, these two numbers are exactly the same. And now let's, again, just to show that that does change, let's change the date. Now you will see that this AVERAGEIFS and AVERAGEIF are identical. That is because we have taken away the additional criteria out of the AVERAGEIFS, and now it's just using one criteria. So now we could take this equation and build upon it to add additional criteria to make it equal the date ranges that we want it to equal. And while we've already done that, we will just copy and paste this back up here, and you'll see that the total, or the average in this case, has updated because we have added in the additional criteria. If we go back to 12/31/2021, all the AVERAGEIFS and AVERAGEIFSs are now equal. That's because we are in the full range of all of the data that we have. Thanks for joining us today as we looked at AVERAGEIF and AVERAGEIFS. Hopefully this video was a little bit better than average, and join us next week when we do some more exploring of Microsoft Excel. Thanks, and see you then. Today on JiK Labs, we're going to find averages of our data that meet certain criteria utilizing count. That was last week.